Before we begin, do you have a theory about this case or a story of your own? Leave a message on our socials. Our handles are all just Nightwatch Files without the space, or head over to nightwatchfiles.com to find them all in one place. Your insights might be featured in a future episode. I'm Harper Finley, and this is Nightwatch Files. St. Mark's Marina, Florida, September 29th, 1994. 3 o'clock in the morning. The boat lurched. Karen jolted awake in the narrow quarter berth, her heart already racing. Footsteps on the deck above. This was the third time in 2 days she'd been startled from sleep by the sound of someone moving around topside. She climbed out quickly to alert Jim. A knock on the companionway, the door separating the upper deck from the cabin below. "Who's there?" "It's Ken." Karen opened the door. Ken was looking down at them, and his expression said everything before he spoke a word. His eyes were misting. This wasn't the happy, carefree man they'd spent the day with just hours earlier. "What is it?" "It's Bonnie. She was in a hiking accident." Karen's first reaction was anger. This was a lie. It had to be. But Ken handed her a yellow post-it note with a phone number written on it. They dressed quickly. Karen stuffed clothes into a duffel bag, her hands shaking. Near the dockmaster's office, they found a payphone. Jim dialed the number. A switchboard operator answered. She suggested they call back in the morning. Karen insisted. The operator connected her to Sergeant Mike Mars of the Alaska State Troopers. Sergeant Mars confirmed it. Bonnie was dead. She'd fallen off a cliff at McHugh Creek. Karen's mind shifted immediately into detective mode. Who was she with? She was alone. How did she get there? She doesn't drive. How was she identified? Her class ring and a state ID photo. None of it made sense. If it's really Bonnie, Karen said, it's gotta be murder. Sergeant Mars insisted it was an accident. What happened to 18-year-old Bonnie Craig? Why was her mother on a boat in Florida when she died? And why was Karen so certain from thousands of miles away that her daughter had been murdered? Karen Foster was born into a Christian household in Chateauguay, Quebec. She was one of 3 children, with 2 older brothers, Andrew and Codge. The family attended St. George's Anglican Church, where Karen sang in the choir every Sunday. Her father seemed to encourage this regular attendance largely because he enjoyed watching her perform. Her father, Codge Larson, grew up on a farm in a small country town in Canada. Through sheer determination, he obtained an electrical engineering degree by attending university at night. For nearly 4 decades, he worked in telecommunications, helping to design the circuit boards for the new touch-tone telephones. He was the quintessential company man, someone who found genuine pleasure in developing what he considered miraculous new technology. When Karen was 10 years old, she would sit beside her father as he excitedly explained the inner workings of these phones. He'd show her the circuit boards through a magnifying glass, enthusiastically describing features like the star and pound buttons. Though technically Anglican by birth, Codge Larson's true devotion lay elsewhere. His work was his real temple, the place where he felt most alive. Family mattered more to him than religion. He maintained a practical philosophy. People couldn't control external circumstances. They could only work hard, try to be a good person, and hope for the best. Karen's mother, Bernice, came from a different background. She grew up Catholic outside of Montreal in a large family with 12 brothers and sisters. She worked part-time as a secretary and had little interest in regular church attendance, only joining the family for Christmas and Easter services when her husband urged her to do so. Karen met Gordon Craig at her high school graduation dance. He was a classmate. By the following week, they were going steady. The relationship moved quickly. Soon after, at 17, Karen became pregnant with Jason. Karen and Gordon married in July 1973. After the wedding, they moved to Calgary. Jason was born following the marriage. 3 years later, in 1976, their second child, Bonnie, was born. On the surface, the marriage functioned adequately. There were no fights and few disagreements. Gordon was a great father to Jason and helpful around the house. But beneath this functional exterior, something essential was missing. Karen later described those nearly 5 years as two horses pulling a cart together, and nothing more. There was no deep emotional connection. This emotional void became impossible to ignore following a family tragedy. On August 1977, Karen's brother Kaj, who shared their father's name, was involved in a car accident. He fell into a coma. For 2 months, from August through October, Karen's parents maintained a vigil at Kaj's hospital bedside in Montreal. They came every single day. They read to him, talked to him, hugged and kissed him. They asked for signals, any indication that he could hear them, wondering constantly if he was conscious and listening, but unable to respond. Halloween night, October 31st, 1977, marked a turning point. Kaj's sister-in-law, Marilyn, decided that Kaj would have wanted his 2-year-old son, Michael, to enjoy Halloween. She put off that day's hospital visit. It was the first day since the accident that Kaj had no visitors. That same night, after holding on for 2 months, Kaj died. At the funeral, Karen spoke with the minister, who acknowledged the question that haunted them all. Had Kaj made some decision somewhere inside to relinquish the fight, or had the connections in his brain simply stopped working? They would never know. The minister offered what comfort he could. God loves all his children, and Kaj would be going to heaven. Hell, he said, is really only here on earth. Gordon showed as little emotion about Kaj's death as he had about everything else during their marriage. For Karen, this was the breaking point. She couldn't live with it anymore. The divorce was friendly and cost $300 and change. Afterward, Gordon made a deliberate choice. He would see Jason and Bonnie only on their birthdays and Christmas. He wanted them and Karen to start a new life. Just a few weeks after finalizing her divorce from Gordon Craig, Karen found herself at a Calgary Sheraton conference room. About 50 people had gathered for an introductory session for Evelyn Wood, a speed reading program. Karen had no real interest in signing up. The 12-week course cost was ridiculous, but she noticed a man lingering in the registration line. His name was Gary Campbell. Karen used a simple ruse. She told him she'd like to call after he finished the course to ask if it was worth the time and money. She asked for his number. 3 months passed. Karen was waiting for the mandatory 3-month period following her divorce to elapse. She kept Gary's number and eventually made the call. Gary initially had no idea who she was. Karen reminded him about their brief interaction at the introductory class. Rather than seeming put off, Gary offered to share all of the course material with her so she could save the money. The gesture charmed her. They met at a restaurant and talked for hours. Afterward, they walked along quiet streets, continuing their conversation as leaves turned red, yellow, and orange in the crisp air. A week later, Gary cooked dinner for Karen at his place. He told her he was an engineer for Esso, Canada's version of Exxon. The relationship moved forward. In the summer of 1980, Karen and Gary Campbell married in their backyard. Karen's parents attended, as did her surviving brother, Andrew, and Gary's brother, Alex. Gary's parents did not attend. Jason, now 5 years old, carried the ring. Bonnie, who was 3, carried the basket of flowers. Gary wore a suit and Karen wore a cream gown and a lace cowboy hat. Their son, Adam, was born the following March in 1981. Their daughter, Samantha, arrived the spring after in 1982. By this point, the family consisted of 6 people: Karen, Gary, Jason, Bonnie, Adam, and Samantha. Shortly after Samantha's birth, their lives entered a period of constant movement. BP recruited Gary Campbell with an offer he couldn't refuse. For the next decade, the company moved the family around the continent. Karen later reflected that she spent those years uprooting her children for a new city almost every year. The relocations began in Calgary, where they'd married. The family then moved to Walnut Creek, California. They spent time in Anchorage, Alaska. They relocated to Midland, Texas, where the children adopted an American Eskimo dog they named Avalanche. A family portrait was taken there in May 1987. From Midland, they moved to Houston. During their time in Texas, they also spent time in Sugar Land, where Karen took her children to a small church on a plantation-like property. The children took their first communion there. It felt like family. The constant relocations took their toll, particularly on Jason. When the family moved to Texas in the late 1980s for Gary's job, Jason moved from high school to high school, switching schools every year. He struggled to fit in among peers with deep Southern drawls and Confederate flags draped over the fronts of their houses. Despite the upheaval, there were moments of ordinary family life. In 1982, Karen took Bonnie, then 6, and Jason, then 8, to see the movie E.T. Bonnie was so engrossed that Reese's Pieces spilled out of the orange bag she was holding. Bonnie had always been nurturing with her younger siblings. At age 5, when Karen was pregnant with Adam, Bonnie was overjoyed about the bump in her mother's stomach, regardless of whether it would be a brother or sister. After Adam was born, Bonnie treated him like her own private Cabbage Patch doll. She wanted to feed him and change his diapers, even though Karen tried to deter her from the messy chore. When Samantha arrived the following spring, Bonnie's care continued. The constant movement finally slowed to an end in late 1989. The family was preparing to move from Houston back to Anchorage. Gary left first with all 4 children and the dog. Karen remained in Houston for an additional month to finish the journalism degree she had started at the University of Houston. She was driven by a simple principle: finish what you start. After completing her degree, Karen traveled to St. Catharines to meet Gary, the children, and her parents for the holidays. They shipped the Chevy van to Anchorage and flew back together. A new chapter was beginning. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. As the 90s began, Karen and Gary Campbell started to recognize that things had changed. Karen felt worn down by following Gary across the continent for BP's transfers. She was unsure of her own identity outside of being a doting wife who'd uprooted her children for a new city almost every year for a decade. The conversation about the status of their relationship became unavoidable. Karen's ambitions were leading her in a different direction. She had previously worked as a news reporter for Chemo 13 News, an ABC affiliate, and retained that adrenaline rush. She sought new thrills and felt compelled by the police world, listening to the police scanner out of fascination. Karen had already completed criminal justice and EMT courses. She had a conversation with Captain Tom Walker of the Anchorage Police Department, who told her the department needed female officers and that she would be a great candidate. Karen enrolled in the police academy. As she neared graduation, Gary realized she would succeed. He presented an ultimatum. He told Karen he did not want a gun in the house. He was uncomfortable sharing a bed with a trained killer. He explicitly stated he would rather see Karen come home in a body bag than find out she had killed someone. Karen asked if he would prefer the mother of his children dead instead of having killed a scumbag. Gary reiterated that he couldn't live with the idea of her killing another human being. The marriage, already shaky, couldn't survive the situation. On the very day of Karen's police academy graduation in September 1992, Gary told all 4 children about the divorce. Jason was 18, Bonnie was 16, Adam was 11, Samantha was 10. Adam, despite being just 11, offered mature support to his mother. He told her, "Mom, you gotta do what's important to you." Karen and Gary Campbell officially divorced in the fall of 1992. Karen continued to use Gary's last name, Campbell, for 2 years after the divorce. Having graduated from the police academy, Karen immediately embarked on her new role. She worked as an unpaid volunteer undercover reserve officer with the Anchorage Police Department. She joined the patrol unit for her first 12-hour shifts. Driven by her desire for thrills and adrenaline, she regularly chose the most active shifts, Friday and Saturday nights. Her responsibilities were varied and intense. She worked drug raids and undercover buys as part of the Metro Unit, special details, and search and rescues. Due to the low number of women in the department, she was often called to the hospital to meet with women who had been assaulted. This work made Karen feel important and productive, like she was making a difference. Her involvement included being wired during buys, hiding her 40mm Glock, and dealing with unpredictable situations. During one bust, the drug dealer arrived with children in the car. During this time, Karen also worked as a realtor. For years, she had been contained by the roles of wife and follower, moving where the corporate current took her. When the opportunity arose to forge her own heavily armored identity as a police officer, the confining shell broke apart. The marital life became impossible to sustain, but her individual mission could finally surface. Shortly after her divorce, Karen began a new romantic relationship. She started dating Jim, who worked as a firefighter and paramedic in Anchorage. By late 1993, they had moved in together. They were attempting to merge two families into one in a modest hillside home in Anchorage. They had previously traveled together to Mexico, where Jim owned some property. The four children navigated the divorce through shared custody and independent living arrangements. Adam and Samantha, the youngest, did week on, week off between Karen's house, where she lived with Jim, and Gary Campbell's house. Jason, now 18 to 20, was independent. He lived in his own apartment with his girlfriend, Tracy. Bonnie, 16 to 17, lived in the house with Karen during much of this period. She would later move out to live with her father for more space, a decision that occurred shortly after March 1994, coinciding with her 18th birthday. When Karen and Jim were away, they would rely on Gary to watch the children. The family was defining new boundaries. Karen and Gary had a clear agreement, never to be out of state at the same time. This period of transition and new beginnings culminated just before Bonnie turned 18 on March 30th, 1994. Bonnie Craig was born in 1976. Her friends would later call her Tigger because she was so bouncy and fun to be around. She would get up in the morning and decide to have a good day, every day. Her childhood was marked by constant movement. Due to Gary Campbell's job with BP, the family relocated almost every year for a decade through locations including Calgary, Walnut Creek in California, Anchorage, Midland in Texas, and Houston. When Bonnie was 5, she and Jason missed the school bus in Calgary and began walking towards school. A man in a car offered them a ride, giving Jason his business card. The man complimented the children, noting that Jason was very protective of his little sister and that they were walking hand in hand, swinging their lunch pails. In Sugar Land, Texas, Bonnie received her first communion in a small church. She and Jason shared a moment of contagious laughter when the bishop accidentally put his mitre on backward. The family settled back in Anchorage in late 1989. Bonnie entered her teenage years during a period of change. Her parents divorced in the fall of 1992 when Bonnie was 16. Bonnie attended Service High School in Anchorage. She played the violin in the school orchestra and was a member of a peer counseling group called Natural Helpers. After a dear friend named Katie died in a drunk driving accident, Bonnie started SAD, Students Against Drunk Driving, at the high school. She wanted to be a social worker or a psychologist. Bonnie was athletic and tough. She became the first girl in Service High School history to be on the wrestling team. Her explicit goal was never to get pinned, a goal she achieved when her match ended in a draw. She was highly responsible. She refused to try alcohol and never dabbled in drugs or lived a risky lifestyle. She carried pepper spray on her keychain for protection. After Karen and Gary split, Bonnie moved with her mother into a new home on Lone Tree Drive. They enjoyed time together, dancing in the empty living room to conga. Karen felt close to her daughter in a way she'd never felt before. During their junior year of high school, Bonnie began a serious relationship with Cameron Miyasaki. They were very similar, and their connection was easy and natural. They often talked about everything. They had previously met as grade schoolers when their families briefly lived in California and were reunited later in Anchorage. As Bonnie approached adulthood, she was enrolled as a freshman at the University of Alaska Anchorage, studying psychology. She took her studies seriously, carrying a full load of core classes. Her schedule included classes starting as early as 7 a.m., 2 days a week, Mondays and Wednesdays. She worked at Sam's Club about 30 hours a week, typically covering 4 days, including every Saturday and Sunday, Tuesday, and one other weekday. Cameron had recently moved to Berkeley, California, to attend college. Bonnie planned to follow him there, although Karen had previously advised against Berkeley due to safety concerns. Bonnie did not have a driver's license and generally relied on rides from her father or friends or public transportation. She often had to walk about 2.5 miles to catch the bus to school. Despite her busy schedule, she continued to look after her younger siblings, Adam and Samantha, who were 13 and 12. Bonnie turned 18 years old on March 30, 1994. This milestone triggered a major change in her living situation. Shortly after her 18th birthday, Bonnie moved out of the modest hillside home her mother shared with Jim. Bonnie moved in with Gary Campbell because she wanted a room of her own. Karen was crushed by this decision, but she understood that space was in short supply at her house. Bonnie maintained her busy schedule. She attended class 2 days a week from 7 a.m. to approximately 4 p.m. She continued working her 30 hours at Sam's Club. She maintained her serious long-distance relationship with Cameron, who had moved to Berkeley a couple of months before late September. They would set up appointments to talk or email online using the computer lab at UAA. In the summer of 1994, Bonnie and Cameron visited Portage Glacier. They also stopped at McHugh Creek to sit on a rock, watch the sun, and talk. During this period, Karen was navigating her new merged family structure. She was living in a modest hillside home in Anchorage with Jim, attempting to blend Jim's 3 children, ages 8 to 13, with her 2 youngest, Adam and Samantha. Adam and Samantha operated on a week-on, week-off schedule between Karen's house and Gary Campbell's house. Karen remained active as a realtor and continued her work as an unpaid volunteer undercover reserve officer with the Anchorage Police Department. Karen and Jim planned a trip to Florida to attend Jim's younger brother Ken's wedding. Karen and Gary Campbell had a strict arrangement that neither parent should be out of state at the same time. Before the trip, Karen called Gary's house and spoke to Bonnie. She became furious upon learning that Gary had left for a sudden business trip to New Orleans that would keep him away for a week, violating their agreement. This left Bonnie, though 18, responsible for looking after Adam and Samantha. Karen found this arrangement inappropriate, despite Bonnie's assertion that she was capable. On Monday, September 26, 1994, Bonnie stayed late at UAA to study with friends, Marvat Obeidi, Robbie Martin, and Justin Devlin. That morning, she had packed a lunch and written a note for her younger sister, Samantha. That same day, Karen and Jim boarded a red-eye flight from Anchorage to Tampa, Florida. They chartered a 37-foot island packet sailboat out of St. Petersburg and began sailing up Florida's western coast. On Tuesday, September 27th, Bonnie ensured Adam and Samantha had breakfast before their bus arrived, then headed to work at Sam's Club. She left them a note promising pizza if they cleaned the house. That evening, she exchanged psychology notes with a classmate, Elaine Enriquez, in preparation for a test the next morning. Gary Campbell returned from his business trip that night around 10 p.m. 2 days into the sailing trip, while sleeping on the boat, Karen was disoriented by a vivid dream. She saw a woman wearing a shorty wetsuit fall over the edge of the sailboat into the water. Jim reassured her it was only a dream. Karen Foster and Jim were on a chartered 37-foot island packet sailboat docked at the St. Mark's Marina in Florida. The day began serenely. On Wednesday morning, September 28th, Jim's brother Ken and his bride-to-be, Valerie, drove 20 miles from Tallahassee to St. Mark's to meet them. The four spent the day together, having lunch, walking, and shopping. Jim's father, Jim Sr., and his stepmother, Mary, joined them for dinner. This was Karen's first time meeting Jim's parents. Karen ate grouper for the first time. The atmosphere was pleasant, fun, and serene. After dinner, the 6 people parted ways. Jim and Karen drove 6 miles from town to a historic local lighthouse, said to be the first in the New World, located at the mouth of the St. Mark's River. They got back to the boat late after the sun had set. The thick Florida humidity made them irritable. The small fans provided little relief. They had a silly argument about nothing, which they realized was a reaction to the heat and the hour. They apologized, kissed, and went to sleep. More than 3,000 miles away in Anchorage, Alaska, Bonnie Craig's day had begun much earlier. Her younger sister, Samantha, heard Bonnie leave early in the morning for her 7 a.m. English class. Bonnie got up around 5 a.m. as usual. Samantha heard her running down the stairs and leaving the house. Bonnie relied on public transportation, often walking about 2.5 miles to catch the bus to school. Around 5:20 a.m., a 15-year-old paper girl named Mandisa Bird saw Bonnie walking down Vern Drive. She was wearing a jean jacket and a red shirt. Soon after, commuter Eric Bear saw someone he thought was a young girl in a blue jacket carrying a backpack. Bonnie was a freshman UAA student who took her studies seriously. She had a psychology test scheduled for that morning but never showed up to take it. At approximately 10 a.m., retired surgeon Dr. Arndt von Hippel was jogging at McHugh Creek. He saw Bonnie bounding down the trail steps. She looked cheerful and was with 3 other young people, 2 young men and another girl. He noted her athletic fashion and commented to her, "You make it look easy." She responded with a smile. In the mid-afternoon, Jennifer Braunschweig was exploring and photographing the area at McHugh Creek. She had only lived in Anchorage for a few months and was exploring the area for the first time alone. She spotted what looked to be a body floating in the water, face down. Jennifer considered going down into the water, but ultimately determined the person looked deceased. She saw no movement. Because this was before the common use of cell phones, she had to leave the scene to call for help. She ran back to her car, drove to the Potter Way station, and called the Alaska State Troopers from there. When the troopers arrived, they asked Jennifer to help put up yellow police tape to block off the area, as no one else had arrived yet. Around 2:30 p.m., the body was identified from her class ring and a state ID picture. She did not have a wallet or any ID on her. Around 3 p.m., Trooper Kurt Harris received the call and headed out to McHugh Creek. Since Sergeant Mike Mars was out of town, Corporal Robert Body led the investigation and assigned Harris as the lead investigator. Troopers, including Barry Wilson in a dive mask, investigated the scene, wading through water and searching for a weapon or evidence. Around 10 p.m., Alaska State Troopers knocked on Gary Campbell's door. Seeing their serious faces, Gary feared the worst. He was called out to the front porch where he was told that Bonnie had been found and was dead. He was devastated. He dropped to his knees and screamed, "No, not Bonnie." Samantha and Adam watched this unfold from the top of the stairs. They gave the trooper Jim's ex-wife's number, who then provided Ken's number. It was 3 in the morning when Karen was jolted out of sleep, feeling the boat lurch. She was startled by footsteps, the 3rd time this had happened in 2 days, and jumped out of her narrow quarter berth to alert Jim. There was a knock on the companionway, the door separating the upper deck from the cabin below. Karen asked who was there. The person responded, "It's Ken." Ken was looking down at Jim and Karen with an expression that conveyed, "I'm sorry for what I'm about to tell you." His eyes were misting, a stark change from his normal, happy demeanor. Karen asked, "What is it?" Ken responded, "It's Bonnie. She was in a hiking accident." Karen's initial reaction was anger and refusal to believe what she called Ken's lie. Ken gave her a yellow post-it note with the trooper's number. Karen and Jim dressed quickly. Karen stuffed clothes into a duffel bag. They found a payphone near the dockmaster's office. Jim dialed the number on the post-it. Karen spoke to the switchboard operator, who initially suggested calling back in the morning, but then connected her to Sergeant Mike Mars. Sergeant Mars confirmed Bonnie's death, stating she fell off a cliff at McHugh Creek. Karen, in detective mode, peppered him with questions. Who was she with? No one, alone. How did she get there? She doesn't drive. How was she identified? Class ring, state ID. Karen declared, "If it's really Bonnie, it's got to be murder." Mars insisted it was an accident. Karen called Gary. They agreed the story made no sense. She also called her parents in Canada to vaguely tell them their granddaughter was dead. After speaking with Sergeant Mike Mars around 3 a.m., Karen and Jim quickly dressed. Karen, Jim, Ken, and Valerie piled into Ken's truck to drive to the Tallahassee airport. Karen remained irritable, clutching the yellow post-it note containing the trooper's number. At the airport, Karen called her reporter friend Kara from a payphone, then Michelle. As she spoke, her body began to shake. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed in a heap on the floor, screaming. Jim witnessed Karen collapse. He immediately turned back to the agent to ask for a second ticket for himself. The journey consisted of multiple legs, Tallahassee to Chicago, then Chicago to Anchorage. Karen was seated on a dark airplane during the early morning hours. The plane was sparsely occupied, holding maybe a dozen other people, most of whom were asleep. Jim sat beside her, his head resting against his shoulder, overcome by fatigue. Karen sobbed, shook her head, rubbed her hands together, and rocked slowly in her seat. She felt paralyzed by remoteness from the truth and wondered when she would wake up from the nightmare. She maintained a persistent thought that Bonnie would be at the airport upon arrival, ashamed of the mix-up, and that they would laugh about the inconvenience. The plane flew across the entire continental United States and slanted through the Canadian Yukon. As the plane descended, Karen desperately prayed she would see her beautiful daughter and be able to hug her. The flight attendants were made aware of Karen and Jim's situation. They were shepherded off the plane ahead of the other passengers and walked along the jetway into the quiet cavern of the terminal. Karen's prayers were unanswered. Bonnie was not there to hug or forgive. They were greeted by Bert McQueen, the police chaplain, and Sergeant Mike Mars, who was physically much larger than Karen had anticipated. Bert, offering condolences, led them to a terminal's makeshift conference room to talk. Bert referred to Bonnie's death as a terrible tragedy in a hiking accident. Karen snapped that it was murder. Mars mentioned the practical matters, including needing a picture of Bonnie and requiring Karen to come to the funeral home to identify her. Karen immediately stood up and walked out of the room. Jim trailed behind her. Bert and Sergeant Mars caught up to them, and they were escorted numbly out of the terminal and into the cruiser. Karen was in a fog during the drive to Gary's house, where her surviving children were waiting. They arrived, and Karen rushed in. Jason, Adam, and Samantha erupted into sobs in her arms. Karen and Jim accompanied Bert and Mars to the funeral home. Karen felt sickened, but believed she had to look at the body. When the white sheet was pulled down, Karen saw her daughter's face. Refusal was no longer possible. Karen and Jim were then escorted to the police station to talk further. Karen insisted, it has to be murder. She asked about Bonnie's missing pepper spray, book bag, and keys. Karen returned home and was immediately inundated with phone calls from the media. To each one, she repeatedly stated, it's murder. On September 30th, 1994, Karen, Jim, Gary, Jason, Adam, and Samantha went back to the funeral home. The children wanted to see their sister. Karen approached first and held Bonnie's hand. She noticed Bonnie's knuckles were bigger than they should be. Her arms were bruised. Karen declared, "These are defensive wounds." She immediately called the troopers, demanding they return to take pictures. She was baffled they had missed these signs. Karen called the Anchorage Police Department, her volunteer force, to ask them to take over the case. She was told they were restricted by jurisdiction. The family picked out a coffin. Karen refused cremation and insisted on a cement vault for burial, keeping exhumation possible for future evidence. Gary raised Bonnie's wish to be buried in Summerside, Prince Edward Island. Outside the funeral home, Karen was surrounded by media again. She shouted about the missing items and stated it was murder. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. In early October 1994, Sergeant Mars called Karen and asked her to come to the station. He requested she back off with the media, arguing that reporting on the missing keys and backpack hindered their work. Mars requested hair and print samples from Karen, Gary, Adam, and Samantha for the elimination process. He admitted the group request was designed to ensure Gary participated without lawyering up. The family complied. Mars privately informed Karen that Gary was ruled out. Karen called Gary to state she would not allow Bonnie's body to go to Prince Edward Island. Gary accused her of stealing a picture given to the troopers. He refused to allow her access to Bonnie's possessions and had put a lock on her bedroom door. Karen drove to the courthouse and obtained an injunction to retrieve the items. Sergeant Mars was required to accompany her to Gary's house to ensure a peaceful retrieval, though he specified he could not assist with carrying boxes. Karen packed Bonnie's items into boxes and laundry baskets, hoping to find clues like bank statements or auto classifieds. She found none that provided answers. The funeral director refused to release Bonnie's body for the service until the $15,000 bill was paid. Gary refused to help unless Karen agreed to the Prince Edward Island burial. Karen paid the full amount using multiple credit cards. The service was held at Rabbit Creek Community Church. The church was overflowing. Mars informed Karen that 5 undercover troopers were searching the crowd for the killer. Jim returned from Florida just an hour before the service began. During the service, Karen cried out when the wrong song was played. 1 week after the murder, Karen drove to Gary's house. At 5 a.m., she started walking Bonnie's 2.5-mile route to the bus stop along Lake Otis Parkway. She was furious at Gary for making Bonnie walk so far. Karen encountered a moose twice, forcing her to hide behind a lamppost. An Alaska state trooper stopped and, recognizing her as Bonnie's mother, drove her part of the way. Karen reached the bus stop after 45 minutes. She saw "Help Me" spray-painted on an apartment complex. She drove to various locations, UAA, McHugh Creek, and physically scoured the ditches and trails, searching for Bonnie's missing backpack. Jim informed Karen he needed to fly to Mexico in a few weeks to handle paperwork related to his property there. Karen was initially hesitant, afraid to leave her children, but by Thursday night, she decided to accompany him to escape the darkness in Anchorage. By mid-November, external support and organized advocacy began. Following Sergeant Mars's suggestion, Karen reluctantly contacted Janice Lienhart of Victims for Justice. Janice, whose family had been victims of murder years earlier, told Karen that victims have no standing in the criminal justice process. Karen attended a group support session, which provided a sense of being not alone. Karen received a call from Sandy Cassidy, who offered to help keep Bonnie's case in the public eye. They formed a group called Friends and Family of Bonnie Craig. Sandy and her husband, Maurice, provided the first donation to a reward fund. They arranged for Bonnie's face to be printed on signs, bumper stickers, and bus ads with the query, "Who killed Bonnie?" The reward fund quickly grew to $5,000. This campaign successfully revived public conversation about the case. Despite the renewed public awareness, the investigation remained stalled as the year ended. Karen continued to receive and forward leads to Sergeant Mars, only to be met with the predictable response, "We'll look into it." As people began preparing for holiday celebrations, the urgency surrounding Bonnie's case faded again. Karen sat alone at midnight, hearing festive voices in the neighborhood, experiencing no peace. The calendar turned to 1995. On the second day of 1995, Karen called Sergeant Mike Mars of the Alaska State Troopers and asked directly whether Bonnie had been raped. Mars refused to confirm or deny this, stating that anything he might reveal would be mere speculation. Karen was furious and frustrated that over 3 months had passed without clarification. During this time, Karen learned that Janice Lienhart of Victims for Justice was advocating on her behalf, specifically pushing for Karen's right to view the autopsy report. Approximately 1 week later, Sergeant Mars called Karen to inform her that she was finally at liberty to see the report and was authorized to meet with the medical examiner, Dr. Thompson. Karen called Janice Lienhart, who strongly advised her not to attend the viewing alone, suggesting she bring Kara Lee, her reporter friend. Though initially reluctant, Sergeant Mars permitted Kara's presence after Karen insisted she was accompanying her strictly as a friend for support. The meeting with Dr. Thompson yielded vital, previously withheld information. The report formally listed the manner of death, homicide, Bonnie had sustained multiple blunt trauma injuries to the head, resulting in brain injuries. There were 11 lacerations distributed uniformly over the back of her head, which Dr. Thompson concluded were sufficiently severe to explain death. Karen saw evidence of defensive struggle, including bruised arms and a palpable fracture on the left index finger. Dr. Thompson disclosed that Bonnie had minor tearing in her vaginal walls. Crucially, the killer had left behind his DNA. Karen viewed autopsy photos showing Bonnie's corpse, broken knuckles, scraped hands, and her bludgeoned head, with parts shaved to expose lacerations. Following the disclosure, Sergeant Mars insisted Karen adhere to a strict gag order. He demanded she keep all information from the report, including the DNA match, confidential, even from her family, to avoid compromising the investigation. In the subsequent weeks, Sergeant Mars informed Karen that tips pointed to a young man who worked with Bonnie at Sam's Club. This individual had allegedly obtained her phone number off the company computer. Mars confirmed that law enforcement planned to bring the suspect in and run his DNA against the sample found on Bonnie. Karen attempted her own private investigation by questioning her daughter Samantha about the coworker. She asked Samantha if Bonnie had ever mentioned a guy bothering or calling her. Samantha replied that she had not and felt Bonnie would never have done that to her long-distance boyfriend, Cameron. Karen concluded that any secrets Bonnie had kept, she had taken with her. Around 1 month later, Sergeant Mars informed Karen that the DNA sample taken from the Sam's Club employee was not a match. Mars quickly pivoted to a new potential suspect, describing another young man who had worked with Bonnie. His name was suspiciously missing from a sign-in sheet for a meeting held the morning of the murder. Mars told Karen that this omission was enough for them to bring him in for questioning. In June 1995, Karen and Jim Foster embarked on a sailing trip with Jim's brother Ken and Ken's wife Valerie, sailing from Seward to Whittier. The voyage typically took about a week. During this trip, they received devastating news. Jim and Ken's father had died of a heart attack. The news was relayed to the Sea Monkey via the Coast Guard radio as they were approaching Whittier. The group immediately cut the trip short and returned to Anchorage. Karen noted that she felt an overwhelming sense of relief that the death was not one of her children. Almost immediately upon returning to town from Whittier, Karen received a call from Sergeant Mike Mars. Mars informed her of a new suspect, a young man who had been in Bonnie's English class and was later found to have been present at McHugh Creek when Bonnie's body was being recovered. Karen knew from her undercover work that killers sometimes returned to the scenes of their crimes out of morbid interest. Karen was contacted by a retired surgeon named Dr. Arndt von Hippel, a regular jogger at McHugh Creek. He reported that he was jogging on the morning of September 28, 1994, and saw Bonnie bounding down the trail steps with 2 young men and another girl. He had tried contacting the troopers multiple times but received no reply, prompting him to call Karen directly. When Karen relayed this information to Sergeant Mars, he confirmed they had Dr. von Hippel's information, but offered the routine response, "We'll certainly let you know if anything comes of it." Bonnie's English teacher provided Karen with a stack of violent and angry journal entries written by the young man in question. Karen took the journal to a forensic psychologist who confirmed the entries indicated the student should not have been eliminated as a suspect without further investigation. However, Sergeant Mars ultimately dismissed the journal entries, reiterating that the investigation relied solely on the DNA results, which had already cleared the suspect. Following the clearance of this last suspect, the case began to go cold. The conversation between Karen and law enforcement slowed to silence. Karen continued to act as a thorn in the troopers' sides, constantly pushing them for results. With the help of Sandy Cassidy, who initiated the group Friends and Family of Bonnie Craig, they maintained a public presence for the case. This effort included the continued distribution of bumper stickers, bus ads, and posters bearing Bonnie's face. Special announcements were placed in the newspaper every September 28th, the anniversary of her death. After more than a year following Bonnie's death, Karen returned to her position as a volunteer undercover reserve officer with the Anchorage Police Department. She noted that she felt like a rookie, finding her instincts rusty and confidence shaken. Her first night back involved covering a murder, which felt surreal. Over the following years, Karen received nothing in return from the troopers. She believed she saw zero evidence of ongoing work. The leads had been exhausted. On May 5, 1997, Karen's first grandchild, Austin, was born. Shortly after his birth, Karen took Austin hiking with her to spruce up a real estate listing located on the hillside. Despite being mentally defeated and believing she could no longer achieve justice for Bonnie, she continued her daily routines. During the hike, Karen was overwhelmed by a primal feeling of fear and danger. She thought about Austin's vulnerability and the dangers of the wilderness, bears and moose. She quickly returned to her car, realizing she needed to listen to her instincts and protect her grandson. This experience triggered a significant change in her outlook. She began thinking about what Bonnie would have wanted her to do, which was to go on and be there for her surviving children and grandson. This period marked a transition. Though Karen vowed never to give up the quest for justice, she recognized that her intense, consuming focus on solving the murder had led her to neglect the emotional needs of her surviving children, Jason, Adam, and Samantha. In May 1998, Karen and her friend and colleague, Marcy Bouchard, drove to Seward, Alaska, to visit the new Sea Life Center. On the return trip, Karen was driving Marcy's car at approximately 75 miles per hour when two cars came speeding around a blind curve side by side. To avoid a head-on collision, Karen was forced to swerve right off the road and onto a steep, narrow shoulder composed of gravel and grass. The car flipped repeatedly, banging through a second and third flip before landing upright, straddling both lanes of the remote road. Karen instinctively applied her police training, instructing Marcy to move slowly due to potential spinal and neck injuries. Karen miraculously managed to retrieve her cell phone and get a signal, unusual for the area, to call 911. Marcy required medical attention to remove asphalt from her elbow, but Karen escaped without a scratch. She felt as though a guardian angel was protecting her. During the incident, Karen's daughter Samantha called spontaneously, a continuation of an intuitive sense Karen noted they had developed. Karen's son, Adam, struggled with impaired vision during this time, necessitating corneal transplants in both eyes. In 1998, Adam underwent a transplant in his left eye. He remained awake for the procedure. Afterward, his vision was improved, though not perfectly clear. Adam underwent the second transplant a year later, just before the 20th century became the 21st. He was put under anesthesia for this one, but the operation was far less successful. The donated cornea did not take, resulting in Adam being considered blind in his right eye. In July 2000, Adam became a father. His daughter, Jaylee, was born in Waco, Texas. Her mother, Jennifer, whom Adam had dated in high school, had left Anchorage near the end of their senior year. Jennifer tried to give the baby up for adoption, but legal protocols required that Family and Youth Services inform the father. Adam was notified and immediately flew down to Waco to meet his daughter. He became deeply committed to her. Karen and Jim Foster continued their relationship, marked by periods of being on again, off again. By the later part of this period, after being together for about 8 years, Jim proposed. Karen accepted, despite their relationship having persistent issues. She didn't understand why he thought tying the knot would transform things. In March 2001, Karen's oldest son, Jason, and his wife, Tracy, welcomed twins, Tanner and Logan. Following the birth of the twins, Jason and Tracy's family moved 2 hours southwest, from Anchorage to Soldotna. In Soldotna, Jason enrolled in a firefighter academy. To provide for his growing family and save money toward his goal of returning to school full-time, Jason sold insurance during this period. As the year concluded, the investigation into Bonnie's murder remained cold, contributing to Karen's feelings of defeat. The end of 2001 neared its close in a nervous hush. It was only 2 months since the planes hit and the towers came down. Karen noted that the entire country was dealing with overwhelming grief, leading her to feel that her personal pain had had its time and was now unimportant in the grand scheme. She concluded that she must figure out a way to keep living while accepting that she no longer had a right to expect the phone call telling her justice would be done. Forensic pathologist Dr. Harry Bonnell retired and started consulting in 2001. By the end of 2001, Janice Lienhart had become uncharacteristically absent-minded. She demonstrated disorientation by scheduling meetings for one location and going to another, or getting appointment times wrong and generally acting scattered. A few weeks before Karen spoke with Wayne, he had informed the friends and family of Bonnie Craig organization that Janice was unable to handle the responsibilities of treasurer any longer. Karen received a call from Wayne Lienhart. He asked her to come by their house. Upon arriving and entering the room, Karen found Wayne and Janice's sister, Sharon, present. Janice was lying in bed. Wayne warned Karen that Janice was not able to respond to much at the moment and didn't recognize most people. He asked Karen not to be offended. Karen was stunned by Janice's frail appearance. Janice, who was known as a vegetarian and a health nut, always trim and full of energy, now had eyes that appeared 1,000 miles away. Karen took Janice's hand and talked to her about nothing, believing she might be listening. Karen then leaned down and gave her a hug. She nearly recoiled at Janice's thinness. As Karen was preparing to leave, Sharon asked Karen for her contact information, noting that she didn't know how or where Janice kept it. Sharon asked if Karen's information would be under Foster or Campbell. Karen replied that, knowing Janice, it would probably be under Bonnie. That's what she used to call her accidentally. A small sound that seemed to be the hint of laughter came from the bed. Everyone turned in amazement. Karen and Sharon realized that Janice had heard them. Karen planned to visit Janice again the following week, but before she could, Sharon called to inform Karen that Janice had died. Tests later revealed that Janice's brain was undergoing rapid deterioration as a result of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a form of mad cow disease. She was only 62 years old. Throughout the period between January 2002 and March 2005, the investigation into Bonnie's murder remained cold, though there were ongoing background processes. Trooper Tim Hunyor returned to duty as an investigator with the Alaska State Troopers in 2002, after having retired as a sergeant in 2000. By 2003, forensic analysis utilizing improved technology was conducted. Kristen Denning, a forensic scientist with the Alaska Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory, re-examined Bonnie's jeans and panties along with the sperm samples that had been found in her. In February 2005, Karen's oldest surviving brother, Andrew, died. Andrew's death was discovered after one of his friends, unable to reach him, asked the landlord to open the door to his small apartment and found him deceased. Andrew had battled psychological demons and health issues throughout his life. He struggled with depression and the resulting dulling effect that had diminished his ambition. He often borrowed money from his parents and Karen without paying it back. Andrew had previously attempted to end his life using pills. He was married to Anna, and they had 2 children, a daughter, Alana, born in 1993, and a son, Aaron, born approximately 3.5 years later. Despite appearing to be an engaged and willing father, Andrew struggled to keep a job and became withdrawn. Prior to his death, his wife, Anna, had requested a divorce. Andrew had claimed he was committing the act because he felt he was doing everyone a favor. The family was saddened by the loss, but noted that his death was not entirely unexpected. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Karen's mother had been suffering from a condition the doctor called failure to thrive, which was diagnosed by June 2006. In lay terms, it was described as a loss of the will to live. This condition was exacerbated by the fact that she had outlived 2 of her 3 children and 1 granddaughter. By June 2006, the doctor revealed that her condition was also worsened by cancer, which had not been apparent before. She had complained of mild discomforts or reduced appetite, but nothing that had previously warranted testing for the disease. Karen's mother died after her spirit finally gave out. She was approximately 75 years old, though she joked she was perpetually 39. The autopsy confirmed the cancer was all over her body. In December 2006, Karen's daughter Samantha, now 24, married Ryan. The wedding took place on the frozen ground of Settlers Bay Golf Course in Wasilla. Samantha wore a wedding dress made of polar fleece. Samantha and Ryan had been dating for 8 years, having met in high school. Ryan was soon to finish his degree in construction management. The couple exchanged vows and celebrated with decorations of blue, silver, and white. They danced, hugged, and ate pizza. The bride and groom made angels in the snow. A week after Samantha's wedding, on Christmas Day, Karen and her friend Belinda drove to the airport. Belinda had suggested the trip in late September 2006, around the anniversary of Bonnie's death, suggesting they reward themselves for a successful year in real estate. Their simple criteria were to go somewhere warmer and sunnier than Alaska, and preferably a place neither had been. They initially booked a flight to Shanghai, but realized it would not be warm enough there in December. They decided to keep the flight to Shanghai, but then continue to the Philippines, where it was always warm. Their planned 3-week itinerary included Shanghai, Hong Kong, Macau, the Philippines, and home. Karen noted that the real estate market was healthy, people were optimistic, and the year 2006 had been a very good one for both her and Belinda career-wise. Karen and Belinda departed for their trip at the end of December 2006. The creation of a national DNA database within the United States was first proposed by the Technical Working Group on DNA Analysis Methods in 1989. The FBI's strategic goal was to maximize the voluntary participation of states and avoid the fragmentation that had occurred several years earlier with the fingerprint identification system, when 8 Western states formed their own competing Western identification network. The FBI's strategy to discourage states from creating systems that competed with CODIS was to develop DNA databasing software and provide it free of charge to state and local crime laboratories. This strategic decision, to provide software free of charge for the purpose of gaining market share, was innovative at that time. In 1990, the FBI began a pilot DNA databasing program with 14 state and local laboratories. In 1994, Congress passed the DNA Identification Act, which authorized the FBI to create a national DNA database of convicted offenders, as well as separate databases for missing persons and forensic samples collected from crime scenes. The act also required that laboratories participating in the CODIS program maintain accreditation from an independent nonprofit organization actively involved in the forensic fields, and that scientists processing DNA samples for submission into CODIS maintain proficiency and be routinely tested to ensure the quality of the profiles being uploaded into the database. The national level of CODIS, known as NDIS, was implemented in October 1998. Today, all 50 states, the District of Columbia, federal law enforcement, the Army Laboratory, and Puerto Rico participate in the national sharing of DNA profiles. The CODIS database contains several different indexes for the storage of DNA profile information. For assistance in criminal investigations, 3 indexes exist: the Offender Index, which contains DNA profiles of those convicted of crimes; the Arrestee Index, which contains profiles of those arrested for crimes pursuant to the laws of the particular state; and the Forensic Index, which contains profiles collected from a crime scene. Additional indexes, such as the Unidentified Human Remains Index, the Missing Persons Index, and the Biological Relatives of Missing Persons Index, are used to assist in identifying missing persons. Specialty indexes also exist for other specimens that do not fall into the other categories, including the Staff Index for profiles of employees who work with the samples. The bulk of identifications using CODIS rely on short tandem repeats, known as STRs, that are scattered throughout the human genome, and on statistics that are used to calculate the rarity of that specific profile in the population. STRs are a type of genetic variation and comprise a sequence of nucleotide base pairs that is repeated over and over again. At each location tested during DNA analysis, also known as a locus, a person has 2 sets of repeats, one from the father and one from the mother. Each set is measured and the number of repeat copies is recorded. If both strands inherited from the parents contain the same number of repeats at that locus, the person is said to be homozygous at that locus. If the repeat numbers differ, they are said to be heterozygous. Every possible difference at a locus is an allele. This repeat determination is performed across a number of loci, and the repeat values form the DNA profile that is uploaded to CODIS. As of January 1, 2017, requirements for upload to national level for known offender profiles is 20 loci. Alternatively, CODIS allows for the upload of mitochondrial DNA information into the missing persons indexes. Since mitochondrial DNA is passed down from mother to offspring, it can be used to link remains to still living relatives who have the same mitochondrial DNA. Karen and Belinda were in Manila, having traveled there from Shanghai. They watched a spectacular fireworks display as 2006 turned into 2007. On January 5, 2007, Karen was at a resort called Club Paradise on Lagin Island. She checked her laptop and noticed a message with the single-word subject line, Bonnie. The sender was Tim Hunyor, an investigator with the Alaska State Troopers Cold Case Unit. The email informed Karen that they had new developments in Bonnie's case and requested that Karen call him or send a telephone number where he could call her. Karen rushed to the front desk and borrowed an old-fashioned, brick-sized cell phone to make an urgent call to Alaska. She made several attempts to call Trooper Hunyor, but the call was spotty, dropping or cutting through static after they exchanged only a few words. Karen replied to his email instead, explaining the small island's lack of landlines and promising to keep trying. After an initial period of intense anxiety, Karen received a second email from Trooper Hunyor. He stated that they had information about an individual in prison in New Hampshire and were starting background checks. He explained that a match had occurred in CODIS between the DNA profile obtained from Bonnie and an individual in the New Hampshire system. Hunyor apologized for sending the news over the internet, but cited the poor phone system. On Monday, January 8, 2007, Karen received a third email from Trooper Hunyor. This message revealed the key identity details. The individual was named Kenneth Dion, born in 1969. Dion was in custody for robbery and received a sentence of 6 to 15 years. Hunyor confirmed the DNA was a good match and that Dion was known to have been in Alaska at the time of the murder. Hunyor also revealed he was familiar with Bonnie's case, having met Karen during the initial investigation in 1994, shortly after transferring to the Criminal Investigations Bureau in Anchorage in August 1994. He had retired as a sergeant in 2000 and returned as an investigator in 2002, joining the cold case unit in March 2006. Trooper Hunyor strongly advised Karen to keep the information about the DNA match and Kenneth Dion confidential. He emphasized that exposing such information prior to trial could be disastrous and endanger their chances at a conviction. Karen and Belinda cut their trip short, returning home on January 18, 2007. Karen immediately called the trooper's office, but was told the earliest she could meet with Trooper Hunyor was the following Tuesday. Karen met with Trooper Tim Hunyor on that Tuesday morning in late January 2007. He stonewalled her on details regarding the progress of getting Kenneth Dion transferred to Alaska due to security concerns. He reiterated the strict gag order, warning that disclosing the DNA match posed a serious risk to the case's success. The waiting period for Kenneth Dion's extradition was marked by frustration. Karen attempted to expedite the transfer process by calling the New Hampshire Troopers' headquarters. An official told her they were doing everything possible and hoped it wouldn't take more than a couple of weeks to get Dion to Alaska. Despite this reassurance, January quickly turned to February, and February to March without Dion's extradition. Karen stayed in contact with Trooper Hunyor, who maintained his calm, kind demeanor and was not annoyed by her persistence. Karen experienced significant difficulty focusing on her real estate work due to the stress of the stalled case. While she had earned over $200,000 in 2006, she earned only $750 in the first quarter of 2007. Karen attended a family roundtable organized by the Department of Justice with the Surviving Parents Coalition. Listening to the accounts of siblings and parents, she realized the extent of her surviving children's suffering due to her own grief and obsession. She called Jason, Adam, and Samantha to apologize for her neglect, acknowledging that they had lost her as their mother for years. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Toward the middle of April 2007, Karen received a call from Trooper Hunyor informing her that the pretrial hearings were going to begin, even though Dion's extradition would take a little bit longer. The indictment was set for April 27, 2007. Karen was directed to coordinate all inquiries regarding the proceedings through Katie Pocky, who worked with the district attorney's office, and Pat Golfusen, the state prosecutor, who worked out of Juneau. Karen, along with her son Adam, ex-husband Gary, and daughter Samantha, attended the indictment hearing at Anchorage's main courthouse on April 27, 2007. Katie Pocky had informed Karen that the charges laid against Dion were first-degree murder, second-degree murder with intent to cause serious injury, second-degree murder with extreme indifference, and first-degree sexual assault. The charge of kidnapping was not filed because the 10-year statute of limitations on that crime had passed. The judge did not read the charges aloud, waiving that step in the interest of time. A default plea of not guilty was entered, as Dion was not yet represented by an attorney. A pretrial conference was set for October 31st, and the trial date was scheduled for December 17th. Following the public release of Kenneth Dion's name, articles in the media surfaced details about his criminal history, noting 18 convictions, 10 misdemeanors, and 8 felonies. With the exception of a 3-year period from 1999 to 2002, Dion never went more than a year from the age of 18 without committing a significant offense. Karen recognized that if Kenneth Dion's DNA had been collected on his earlier arrests, Bonnie's murder could have been solved months or years earlier. She channeled her energy from detective work to lobbying. Karen learned that Alaska did not collect DNA upon felony arrest. Despite there being only 16 days left in the legislative session, she ran with the idea, bringing it to Governor Sarah Palin and Senator Hollis French. The bill requiring the collection of DNA on felony arrest was passed within 12 days and signed into law by Governor Palin in June 2007. Alaska became the 7th state to enact such a law. In July 2007, Karen received a call from Trooper Hunyor informing her that Kenneth Dion had been extradited from New Hampshire and was now in custody in Alaska. Karen felt newly desecrated by his presence in her home state. Karen saw Kenneth Dion for the first time during the first pretrial hearing, which occurred near the 13th anniversary of Bonnie's murder. Dion wore a suit and had a vaguely agitated look. His red hair was shaved close to his scalp. Karen felt hatred and revulsion toward him and noticed the word "lost" tattooed across one set of his knuckles and "soul" across the other. Lawyers exchanged information, the judge asked questions, and Dion sat staring forward, revealing nothing. In mid-October 2007, Karen received an unexpected call from the Alaska Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory, asking her to be the keynote speaker at the National CODIS convention in San Francisco at the end of the month. Karen attended the convention, accompanied by Jim Foster, and spoke to an audience of about 500 attendees, including law enforcement and crime lab specialists. She spoke about Bonnie's case and the imperative need for collection of DNA upon felony arrest across all 50 states. Karen emphasized that the conviction rate for felonies with DNA evidence is over 90%. She referred to the attendees as the new heroes of justice. Following Dion's indictment and extradition, Karen continued her public advocacy work. She started pushing for a new crime lab in Alaska. She met with the mayor of Anchorage to secure a land donation and launched the website AlaskanCitizensForJustice.com to generate support. She contacted state senators and representatives and organized a joint press conference with Victims for Justice and STAR, Standing Together Against Rape, to highlight that the current crime lab was underfunded and under-resourced. She stressed that the issue was a lack of resources and space, as the general fund existed. The initial trial date, set for December 17, 2007, was subject to constant rescheduling and postponement. The trial was first reset for September 2008. September 2008 was then changed to January 2009, and subsequently, January 2009 was changed to May 2009. The reasons for the delays included the defense needing extra time to review files, a judge's family vacation, and the need for more information on the DNA evidence. The situation worsened when the initial judge assigned to the case was arrested for drunk driving and subsequently withdrawn. Following this, the first defense attorney assigned was taken off the case after discovering a conflict, and the case was turned over to the Office of Public Advocacy. Andrew Lambert, the third attorney assigned to represent Kenneth Dion, stated that the previous two attorneys had done basically nothing and requested another year to prepare his case. The night before each scheduled hearing, Karen's body and mind were a mess, experiencing terrible anxiety for what usually resulted in 5 or 10 minutes of disappointment. She saw Dion once more in orange prison garb. His typical absences made everything seem even less real. In mid-February 2009, Karen attended a meeting of the Surviving Parents Coalition in Boca Raton, Florida. There she met Hank Asher, a wealthy data miner who had donated a significant amount of money to the SPC to lobby for child protection laws. Karen volunteered to fly to Tallahassee because she heard the DNA bill was stalled in the State Judiciary Committee. She met with key players on the committee and addressed them about the importance of the DNA bill. Hank Asher offered Karen a position to move to Boca Raton and work for his organization, TLO, the last one. The goal was to help fight the battle at the grassroots level, specifically pushing for legislation requiring DNA collection on all felony arrests across all 50 states to help other families avoid the nightmare her family had endured. Karen realized the move would give her a chance to fight the legislative battle with greater strength and support. Karen informed her children, Jason, Adam, and Samantha, that she was moving across the continent to continue fighting on Bonnie's behalf. She emphasized the importance of getting the DNA bill passed in Florida to facilitate similar changes in other eastern states. She pointed out that TLO would fly her back for the trial and pretrial hearings. Her children were supportive, understanding that she was doing the right thing and recognizing that they had Skype and Facebook to stay connected. By March 2009, Karen had accepted the new position and moved to Florida. Shortly following Karen's move to Boca Raton, Florida, in March 2009, her son Adam suffered extensive neck injuries after being rear-ended in a car accident. The impact was large, causing the car to be accordioned. Adam was admitted to the hospital, where he was stabilized and given medication. His injuries included 2 torn discs and a torn ligament in his neck. Adam's wife, Trina, informed Karen that Adam was badly injured, but insisted that rushing back would not help. Adam, speaking to Karen while in a drug haze, insisted she should focus on her job in Florida and that he had sufficient support. He warned her that if she worried about him instead of focusing on her work, he wouldn't forgive her. His prognosis required hours of hard rehab if he wanted to be able to lift his daughters normally. Concurrently with Adam's accident, Karen's oldest son, Jason, achieved a long-standing goal. Jason called Karen to share that he had finished his paramedic degree. He had just completed the last exam for the degree. Jason had been striving for this goal since he was a teenager, having participated in the Medical Explorers program and volunteering in an emergency room. Jason intended to start an internship at McHugh Creek, just north of Houston, the following month. Upon completing the internship, he would officially become a paramedic. He stated that after that, they would return to Anchorage. By the late fall of 2010, approximately 18 months after Karen moved to Florida, she received a call from a hospital in London, Ontario, informing her that her father had been admitted with a kidney issue. The doctor also noted that her father seemed progressively disoriented. Karen immediately flew to Canada to see him. Upon arrival, Karen realized he could no longer take care of himself. She noted that he had visibly aged overnight. Her father, however, remained lucid enough to reject the idea of moving into a retirement community or assisted living facility. Consequently, in November 2010, Karen packed up her condo in Hillsborough Beach, Florida, put most of her belongings into storage, and drove north to arrive at her father's doorstep in Canada to care for him. Karen described this decision as the child taking care of the parent, representing part of life's cycles. The trial for Kenneth Dion began on May 10, 2011, in Anchorage Superior Court. The prosecution team included Assistant District Attorneys Paul Miovis and Jenna Grunstein. The defense team consisted of Andrew Lambert and Lee Ann Bauer. The process of voir dire began to select a final jury of 15 from an initial pool of approximately 120 prospective jurors. Karen, her father, and her children attended the process, with Paul Miovis including the family's input on potential jurors. On May 11th, Miovis presented Bonnie's character to the jury, emphasizing her dedication as an 18-year-old freshman at the University of Alaska Anchorage. He detailed her full class load and her job at Sam's Club, which involved approximately 30 hours of work per week. He described her routine, including her 2.5-mile walk to the bus stop, and her responsibilities caring for her younger siblings. Miovis showed a picture of the smiling Bonnie Craig. He mentioned that Bonnie's body was found floating in the water at McHugh Creek by a young woman named Jennifer Braunschweig, now Larson. He disclosed key evidence. Bonnie had sustained 11 lacerations distributed uniformly over the back of her head. A leaf with a drop of Bonnie's blood on it was found at the top of the cliff, suggesting she was injured before going over. On May 12th, defense attorney Andrew Lambert stated that Bonnie was not murdered or sexually assaulted. He argued that Bonnie tumbled down a 35-foot rocky cliff at McHugh Creek and that she and Kenneth Dion had consensual sex. He stressed that there were no witnesses placing Dion's car, a 1991 black Ford Tempo, or Dion himself near Bonnie's route or McHugh Creek. He cited the testimony of retired surgeon Dr. Arndt von Hippel, who saw Bonnie happy, joyful, having a good time with 2 guys and a girl around 10 a.m. on the day of her death. Samantha testified about Bonnie's routine and dedication. Under cross-examination, Lambert tried to paint a picture of family disarray and chaos. Bonnie's long-distance boyfriend, Cameron Miyasaki, testified about their loving relationship. Lambert cross-examined him extensively, suggesting Bonnie had flirted with other men, aiming to undermine her character. Bonnie's best friend, Lynn Witt, now Catchpole, testified to Bonnie's loyalty to Cameron, disputing the defense's portrayal of a promiscuous girl. Lambert concluded his cross-examination by pointing out that Lynn couldn't testify that Dion murdered, raped, or kidnapped Bonnie. Gary Campbell testified about Bonnie's routine, her missing items, backpack, keys, and the trooper's arrival at his home. Lambert introduced the name Joe Barr, suggesting Bonnie had been pursuing this other man, which Gary was unaware of. Jennifer Larson, formerly Braunschweig, the young woman who found Bonnie's body, testified about discovering the body floating face down in the water in the mid-afternoon. She confirmed that the trail she hiked was pretty flat and not particularly treacherous. Lambert used her testimony to highlight the lack of blood trails or signs of struggle at the scene. On May 31st, medical examiner Dr. Norman Thompson testified that the manner of death was homicide. He stated the cause of death was multiple blunt impact injuries to the head, severe enough to explain death. He confirmed that Bonnie's broken knuckles and bruised arms were consistent with defensive wounds. He revealed that the laceration in Bonnie's vagina suggested minor tearing and had some darker discoloration, suggesting it occurred while she was still alive. He testified that the 11 head lacerations were inconsistent with an accidental fall and were consistent with focused, blunt force trauma using an instrument. On June 2nd, Captain Robert Beatty testified about the initial investigation. A video of the crime scene, previously thought lost, was shown in court. Karen watched the video, observing the troopers' careful and methodical investigation, which relieved her prior anger about their initial handling of the scene. Beatty admitted under cross-examination that he found no evidence, witnesses, blood, car, connecting Kenneth Dion to the scene. Forensic scientists Kristen Denning and Jessica Hogan testified about the DNA evidence, confirming that Kenneth Dion's DNA was found on Bonnie's clothing and inside her body. Hogan confirmed that Dion cannot be excluded as the source of the DNA. Trooper Barry Wilson testified about the investigation, including performing a float test to determine the path of the body. Dr. Arndt von Hippel, who previously identified Dion from a newspaper photo, testified again, saying that he had seen Bonnie with 2 men and another girl at McHugh Creek. When asked to confirm that Dion was the man in the courtroom, he stated he could not be sure. On June 13th, the defense called forensic pathologist Dr. Harry Bennell, who argued that Bonnie's death was greater than 50% accidental. He asserted that her injuries were consistent with impacting different shaped surfaces, such as rocks, during a fall. Under cross-examination, Paul Miovas successfully decimated Dr. Bonnell's credibility by showing he hadn't read recent relevant literature and may have been sleeping during the lunch break. On June 14th, closing arguments took place. Miovas strongly emphasized that Dion was lying about not knowing Bonnie, pointing to his alibi and the forensic evidence. He countered the defense's blood argument by presenting a final strategic point. Dion killed Bonnie in the water, which is why there was no blood at the scene. Lambert focused on reasonable doubt, criticizing the investigation and casting doubt on Bonnie's character by citing reality TV and infidelity examples. The jury deliberated quickly and returned a verdict the next morning on June 15th. Kenneth Dion was found guilty on all 4 counts: first-degree murder, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and first-degree sexual assault. Karen collapsed against her son Adam upon hearing the verdict. The juror later interviewed on television stated that the deciding factor was Trooper Hunyor's interrogation video, as Dion's denial of knowing Bonnie contradicted the high media coverage and the fact he had sex with her. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for October 31st, Halloween. In the immediate aftermath of the verdict, Karen experienced conflicting emotions. There was relief, even elation, knowing the killer could no longer harm anyone else. But beneath that was an unshakable sadness. Nothing would bring Bonnie back. Karen's family spoke with Channel 11, the local television station. She praised prosecutor Paul Miovas and admitted she'd hoped for this outcome but feared the alternative. Her son Jason told reporters he doubted anyone would ever be caught, but was grateful DNA had been collected at the scene. Adam said he'd been praying for a victory and couldn't bring himself to think badly of Dion. A juror also spoke to Channel 11. They revealed the decision hadn't been easy. The defense had created real doubt, but the turning point came when they watched the interrogation video recorded by Trooper Tim Hunyor. On that tape, Dion denied knowing Bonnie, despite the extensive media coverage surrounding her death. To the juror, this raised immediate red flags. As the sentencing date approached, Karen asked her 3 surviving children if they wanted to address Kenneth Dion in court. She made it clear there was no pressure, no expectation. Jason and Adam said yes immediately. Samantha told her mother she'd wanted to speak ever since hearing the verdict. October 31st, 2011, the courtroom filled for the sentencing hearing. Trial jurors weren't required to attend, but the victim impact statements would be heard. Samantha spoke first. Her statement was a combination of rage and catharsis. She read directly to Dion, telling him he would never begin to understand the totality of his actions. She hoped her words would haunt him for the rest of his life. Dion had taken her childhood, her sense of self and esteem, her ability to trust. She'd even lost her mother for years, consumed by grief and obsession. She called him a heartless, soulless coward, a lying coward who'd tried to taint her sister's reputation. Then she thanked him for being careless, for getting caught, for showing her what evil looked like so she could better cherish the good. When Samantha finished, Jason and Adam motioned for their mother to speak. Karen stood. She detailed 17 years of suffering. The pain of loss, she said, was like having your guts ripped out. She apologized again to her surviving children for neglecting them while she'd been consumed with catching the killer. She spoke about Bonnie, bubbly, kind, a natural helper who'd started the local chapter of Students Against Drunk Drivers. She called Dion a disgrace, a coward, a weasel. She pointed out his knuckle tattoo, lost soul, an accurate description. As a Christian, Karen said she knew she had to forgive him. But she made 2 promises. "I will never forget," she said, "and I will make sure you never walk out of those prison doors." Jason and Adam never found the strength to stand. Karen held them close and told them it was okay. Prosecutor Paul Miovis rose to deliver his sentencing recommendation. He asked for the maximum, 99 years for first-degree murder and 25 years for first-degree sexual assault, 124 years total. More importantly, Miovis argued, Kenneth Dion's ability to receive parole needed to be severely restricted. Miovis laid out his reasoning. Dion had 18 prior convictions, including 8 felonies. 2 states had tried and failed to rehabilitate him. His criminal history included armed robberies and violent assaults. In January 1994, he'd beaten his pregnant wife, Tammy Gregory, after she refused to have sex with him. Throughout Miovis's statement, Dion interrupted repeatedly. "That's a lie, man," he shouted. "I don't like listening to these lies and bullshit, Your Honor." When Miovis said rehabilitation was impossible without accepting responsibility, Dion yelled, "And I never will." Judge Smith considered the arguments. He agreed a 99-year sentence was warranted. He sentenced Dion to 99 years flat for count 1, first-degree murder, and 25 years flat for count 4, first-degree sexual assault. There would be no suspended time. But Judge Smith did grant Dion the chance for discretionary parole. By his calculation, Dion would be eligible for a parole hearing after serving 39.25 years, 33 years on the murder conviction, and 6.25 years on the sexual assault conviction. With maximum good time, Dion could potentially be released after 82 years. Karen made a note of the date. If she was still alive, she would be there. Before the sentence was formally imposed, Dion's anger seemed to drain away. "I have nothing to say, Your Honor, at all," he said quietly, collapsing in his seat. He appeared to accept his fate. Outside the courthouse, the family gave a final group interview. They expressed relief. Looking up, they spoke directly to Bonnie. "We love you." After the sentencing in October 2011, Karen remained in Florida, continuing the work she'd begun. Her focus had shifted from detective to advocate. The years of waiting, the constant postponements, the 17 years of uncertainty, all of it had shown her where the system failed families like hers. In 2012, Alaska passed legislation addressing the delays that had plagued Bonnie's case. The new law attempted to take into account a victim's right to timely disposition of their case. It was, as Karen described it, a small step, but an important one. The following year, Karen appeared on Investigation Discovery's Deadline, Crime with Tamron Hall. The episode, titled A Mother's Mission, detailed Bonnie's case and Karen's efforts to push for DNA collection on all felony arrests across the country. She continued meeting with state legislators, crime lab officials, and law enforcement communities, working to improve the justice system and prevent other families from enduring what hers had. Through it all, Karen maintained her connection to her surviving children and grandchildren. Every year on March 30th, Bonnie's birthday, the family gathered for dinner. Karen's granddaughters, Jaylee, Zoe, and Em, would visit Bonnie's grave, bringing flowers and wishing her happy birthday. In October 2013, Karen attended Jason's wedding. He'd previously split from Tracy, and his 3 children, Austin, now 9, and the twins, Tanner and Logan, now 12, were splitting time between their parents. The wedding brought the family together. In the photographs from that day, Karen stands with Jason, Samantha, Adam, and Jim's son, Jesse. Karen's relationship with Jim remained complicated, on again, off again, as it had been for years. But he was still part of her life, someone who understood the weight she carried. Karen had spent years following her children across the continent, uprooting them for corporate transfers, losing herself in the role of dutiful wife. After her divorce from Gary, she'd found purpose in police work, chasing adrenaline and justice. Then Bonnie's murder consumed her entirely, pulling her away from Jason, Adam, and Samantha when they needed her most. Now, working in Florida, she'd found a way to channel that obsession into something constructive. She couldn't bring Bonnie back. She couldn't undo the 17 years her family spent waiting for answers. But she could fight to ensure other families had a better chance at justice. The work Karen began in Alaska, the DNA on arrest legislation she'd pushed through in just 12 days, became her mission beyond state lines. Alaska had been the 7th state to pass such a law. Karen was determined it wouldn't be the last. She worked with legislators across the country, traveling for conferences, testifying before committees, meeting with anyone who would listen. Her message was simple. Kenneth Dion's DNA should have been in the system years before Bonnie died. If it had been, she might still be alive. The statistics backed her up. The conviction rate for felonies with DNA evidence exceeded 90%. DNA databases worked. They solved cold cases. They prevented future crimes, but only if states actually collected the samples. Karen had learned over nearly 2 decades that the justice system moves slowly, that families of victims have almost no standing in the criminal process, that waiting for answers can destroy you if you let it. She'd also learned that giving up was never an option. Bonnie had wanted to be a social worker or a psychologist. She'd started Students Against Drunk Driving at her high school after her friend Katie died. She'd been the first girl on Service High's wrestling team, determined never to be pinned. She'd cared for her younger siblings, walked 2.5 miles to catch the bus, carried pepper spray on her keychain, and refused to try alcohol or drugs. She'd been responsible, dedicated, and careful, and none of it had saved her. But her death, and the years Karen spent fighting for justice, had changed laws, had solved other cold cases, had given other families answers years sooner than they might have received them otherwise. Karen continued her work in Florida, staying connected to her children through Skype and Facebook, flying back to Alaska when needed. She remained in contact with the Alaska State Troopers, the crime lab, advocacy organizations like Victims for Justice and STAR, standing together against rape. The work was never finished. There were more states to lobby, more legislators to convince, more families who needed support. Karen had found her purpose in the wreckage of her daughter's death. She would never forget. She would never stop fighting. And somewhere in that mission, she'd found a way to honor Bonnie's memory, not by remaining frozen in grief, but by moving forward and making sure her daughter's death meant something. Every March 30th, the family gathered. They remembered Bonnie bouncy and fun, the girl everyone called Tigger. They remembered her smile, her dedication, her kindness. They brought flowers to her grave and wished her happy birthday. And Karen kept working,